It's Friday, and that means it's time for the next in our Fanzine Friday series. And today I've got a special treat, a really rare early fanzine called Black Rider No. 1. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, I take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look, and today it's a real treat. This is Black Rider No. 1. It's not dated, but we think it's probably from around 1980, maybe 1981. Hope you enjoy the video. Okay, so today we're taking a look at Black Rider No. 1. It's the size we're used to. It's heavy stock cover with paper folded in half with staples to hold it in place. I apologize, my voice is not up to par today, but the fanzine we've got more than makes up for it. This fanzine is really rare. It's from the United Kingdom, and there are 4 issues in all. I've got all 4 issues, so we'll look at those in the coming weeks. This is done by Gavin Carver with Jonathan Dick, Tim Lyons, Richard Wickes, Sean Harris, and Craig Callaghan. They've got quite a crew of folks, and when we get to the table of contents, we'll talk a little bit about a number of things different people in the group have contributed. So here's the cover. The cover is done by Steve Lewis. He doesn't do any other art in the magazine, but he does the cover. I think he does at least a couple more covers in the future as well. It's pretty cool. You got this pterodactyl, but just a very iconic illustration here on the cover. The editorial is extremely short. He just basically says, hey, this is our first edition of Black Rider. This is going to be designed to entertain and inform folks, and we've got a good group of people and a good group of articles, and they're going to be focused, at least initially, on Dungeons and Dragons. He asked folks to make contributions as well. Here's the table of contents. They did have a table of contents. I just think it's a little easier to read typed out like this. So we got the editorial contents page. Start here, which looks at a discussion of bringing in new players. Smash and Grab, which is an introductory adventure he's got designed for new players. Potluck, which is some random rules and ideas. A second adventure for more advanced players called Shrine of the Frog Folk. Odds and Ends, which is the random stuff. A DM's Aid, which are some tips on designing a dungeon. Review of a game called Sauron from SPI. And now for, and again, it's just some commentary on D&D play, model reviews, which are, by that they mean miniatures, and Calling All Thieves. So a bunch of articles. We're going to talk about just about all of them. As I said, as we go along, I'll mention who was doing what from this group. Steve Lewis only does the cover art, and then Richard Wickes and Sean Harris are the art contributors. Craig Callaghan contributes an article. He also is the circulation person at the magazine. Fanzine. Okay, so when he says start here, he talks about getting new players in and how important it is to be thoughtful that you don't overwhelm them by dropping them in the middle of a bunch of experienced players, because they said they'll get hopelessly confused and feel frustrated that they don't know what's going on, or the game will grind to a complete halt and your experienced players may become frustrated. So he says it's a really good idea to have a specially designed introductory adventure that's going to be short, so they can sort of play, have fun, feel like they knew what was going on enough to participate, and then leave with a positive experience. He also talks about, if you can, get them in there with all new players, so nobody feels like, oh, I'm the only person who doesn't know what's going on. Everybody's sort of in it together, right? And then, to follow up with that, here's a very thoughtful scenario here. And this is called Smash and Grab. And essentially, you're in a tavern, there's a dwarf at the bar, he comes over and talks to you, so he says, get the players warmed up to role-playing a little. He's going to ask you to come. He's got a upcoming important horse race, and his big competitor, he says he anticipates, is going to try and do something to his horses the night before the big race. And so he'll hire you to stay in the stables and protect the horses. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. He says if you want, you could add in a little random encounter on the way, but essentially the meat of it is you get there, you get to the stables, it's evening, they got to set up their watch order, their plans, whatever they want to do. And as he says, some players really amaze you with the creative things they come up with to do to try and protect the horses, protect the stables. And predictably, sometime during the night, there is in fact an attack, and you see whether or not the players can repel that attack. There's a couple other little tricks and special things in there, but if you're successful, through the night and you get the horses to the race, then you've won. This guy had offered a reward, he says in here, 500 gold pieces per party member. So that's a pretty good reward. And it's a pretty good little adventure. I think excellent, short beginner's adventure, which is exactly what he was aiming to do. So I give this one an A+. This one was done by Gavin. This adventure is done by Gavin Carver. Okay, so Potluck. This one he credits up to Jonathan Dick, and they said this is a section that's just going to talk about some random things we think would be interesting. The first one is his table for rolling for neutrally aligned characters, because he says, in his view, if you're neutral, you don't have any interest in helping the party or hurting the party, so it all sort of depends on how the reactions go when you encounter someone, but the default would be just to sort of mumble and move on and not talk to you at all. So he's got a general reaction everywhere from aggressive and hostile all the way up to friendly and enthusiastically friendly. And then based on that, he says you roll to see if they will attack the party or run away from the party, ignore your questions or answer your questions, give you good advice, give you misleading advice, or actually try to help you. Right? So that's pretty interesting. I like that. I like that concept. The next thing he talks about is damage when you fall, and he says essentially, you'll land on leg, arm, or head. So he's basically says you should roll for that. And then based on how far you fall, he's got a chart. You roll percentile die or d20 to see how injured you are, which is not at all, pretty injured, or severely injured, which would include broken arms, broken legs, broken neck. And he's got theories on how long you'd have to heal, how much damage that would do, and so forth. The next one is a table that talks about climbing, and he starts with the presumption that every character can climb walls. Obviously thieves can do it better, and so he's got a percentile table here based on how experienced and he used how experienced you are, basically novice, intermediate, advanced, and he says you decide what levels to make that, and then based on your class, based on your skill level, you get this, and you could give them a plus or minus for armor, plus or minus for high dexterity if you wanted to. And the final one, the really crunchy bits, the movement of brush fires, how fast they'll move, what direction they'll move, and then tables to use if your characters want to engage in attempts to put those out. If you've seen my videos, I don't really love this kind of stuff. My characters are never going to spend time fighting brush fires with rolling d20s to see if they can use a blanket or water to put them out. But that's his idea, and if if you're interested in that, then here's a great table for you. All right, this adventure, Shrine of the Frog Folk. Come back to this in a second. He says this is for an experienced group of players, second to third level characters. Okay, about 6. Keep that in mind. And so here's the dungeon layout, and here's the pages, about 5 pages of text. I would say this is probably, if you guys play a long session, probably a one-night adventure, unless you guys really, your players really bogged down somewhere, then maybe it rolls over to a second day or second weekend. I found this one to be sort of fair to middling. There's some of it's very good. I like the dungeon design. Some of it's very good thematically. These frog folk are here, but then there's just and good traps and other things that I like. And then there's just some random creatures, stone giants and medusas and things that he's put in here that there's really no explanation or understanding how or why they would ever end up in this ancient shrine. And so, for background, there were these frog folks, half frog, half human kind of people, and they sort of went away, but lately, predictably, there's been some resurgence of them, and so you're going in to see what's going on inside of the adventure, or inside of the dungeon. And this adventure is done by Gavin Carver, who I'm going to guess is maybe the main person, since he wrote the editorial intro for the fanzine. Odds and ends. There's a book review of Lord of the Rings, which came out in 1969, but I guess they felt like it was a good place to start with their book review. Craig Callaghan did that. And then there's one magic item called Wim Dung's Sphere. It's a dead guy's head. and if you hold it, you can get some bonuses, but as soon as you start carrying it around, the head will regenerate. But he'll give you this, a magic user, one really high level spell in return for carrying him. Somehow carrying him will cause his head to reanimate, not the rest of his body, and but then his head will be alive, and so in reward for that, he'll give you a magic item. Tim Lyons does DM's Aid. I like this one. This is an aid to better dungeon design, and he gives you some suggestions which I think are, equally valid today as they would have been. That's the great thing about some of this stuff, right? Is something from the 80s like this on how to design good dungeons is every bit as helpful today as it would have been 30, 40 years ago. So here's some of his tips. Make your dungeon straightforward in purpose. Give the players, and I think this is probably the best tip he's got, make sure your players understand a clear task they're trying to accomplish. He said if you make it too hard to figure out or it's not clear, they will flail around and have no idea what you think they're supposed to be doing, and that becomes frustrating for everybody. Give some diversity to your dungeon. Different types of monsters, different types of rooms, traps, feelings to different parts of the area, etc. Don't make it too hard so everybody just feels like all they ever do is run away. Don't make it too easy so they feel like they just run around, bash a monster, and grab treasure either, right? Try to find that balance, which is always the art of being a good DM. Spread your dungeons out, and that's part of sort of the other one, I think. That just allows you, if you make it sort of spread out on the map, you've got you can make sort of thematic areas, or find an area for a trap, and then maybe an area where just maybe nothing, or rest, puzzles. Then maybe there's some types of monsters that you come upon. He also suggests, of course, making more than one level. He says he thinks players are always really excited when they find, the stairs or the chute or whatever it is that helps them get down to a lower level. They sort of instinctively feel the excitement of knowing that's probably going to be harder, right? More risk, more reward. And he said, so that's always a good sort of emotional reaction you get from your players when you use that. And he says, add in some diversions to pull them away from the main objective, to make them make choices, right? So he says maybe you find somebody in the dungeon and your objectives is to the left where you're supposed to defeat the bad guy, but this guy wants to tell you about some great treasure or whatever that's in a different direction, and will your players take the risk and the time to go there? He also mentions this an idea I've seen other people do, which is have another party going into the dungeon to create some sense of time pressure, right? So if you're trying to get to the objective clearly defined and important with a reward, let them know that in so many turns, which they don't know the exact number, another party might get there first. And that's always a good motivator, especially for people who seem like they bog down in your dungeon, right? Attack, rest kind of thing. And so now we've got just a little random thought here. This is from Richard Wickes, who does some of the art as well. And these are his thoughts on beginning characters. He's like, main thing, make sure you get good armor. For some reason, he thinks leather would be best. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the balance between cost and reward. Always have a dagger, he says, and probably more than one. As he points out, you can throw 2 per round, and pretty much everybody can use a dagger. So that's like general advice. He says then you have to pick your main weapon, especially unless maybe you're a magic user. And so he talks about the different choices between, edged weapons and blunt weapons, and what you might use them for, and how much damage to do, and so forth. He says don't forget your tinderbox, because it's nothing more embarrassing than having torches and no way to light them. Rope, a grappling hook, and consider what type of light source you want to take. And he points out, a bullseye lantern, really bright light, but only in a particular area. So there's lots of shadows for things to hide in, and if you're not being real descriptive about what you do with it, a good DM is going to cause you to miss seeing things that are naturally move away from the light and hide in the darkness. So, and then finally, he mentions should you use dogs and piglets, and apparently his characters take little piglets and make them test all the potions to see if they're poison or see what happens to them. But of course, as he points out, those are wandering monster attractors, because a good DM is going to make them squeak and try to get away and all that kind of stuff. And then I've seen several people use war dogs effectively, but he doesn't like it. He says dogs will tend to bark and make noise whenever they get near a monster to ruin your chance to ever achieve surprise. But of course, a well-trained dog would not do that. But anyway. Next time, he says, by the way, he's going to write an article on how to con people and what rules to use for conning people. Now we have model review, which is a review of miniatures. He looks at Asgard character series. He looks at some Citadel models and some Ral Partha models. He says that for D&D figures, he likes Asgard the best, and he talks about the variety that they have as well as how well done most of them are. He thinks Citadel is good, but not as good, although he really likes, and frankly, in part because they don't have enough variety, but he really likes their monsters, their Fiend Factory, I think it's called the Fiend Factory, and some other monsters, fantasy specials that they do. And then he likes the Ral Partha Collector series, the C series, which are Tom Meyer sculpts, and they're fantastic. And sometime I'm going to make some miniature videos and talk about the miniatures I have and the ones I like, etc. So that's the model review. And now we've got Calling All Thieves, and you'll see the subtitle is Notes on Notes, and that's really what this is about. Apparently the thieves in their campaigns are always trying to steal stuff from the party members. I played with lots of thieves, and they generally don't do that, but apparently in their campaign it was really common. He suggests he thinks it's common in a lot of campaigns. He talks about the problem is when the thief wants to do that, he has to send a note right to the DM to say, hey, I'm going to pick this guy's pocket or steal his gem or whatever. He said, and after about the first or second time you do that, player starts, anytime a thief hands a note to the DM, he said they all step away from the thief, check their pockets, search their backpack, and if they find something missing, they throttle the thief. Which makes sense to me. That's why thieves shouldn't do that. But in any event, he's just he comes up with some brainstorm ideas, like every 5 minutes, everyone passes a piece of paper, and some of which could be blank. He says the thief could lie about his class, say, for example, he's a fighter, and so at least by virtue of telling what his class is, people don't assume he's a thief, but even so, I think the notes gets pretty obvious. And then the other thing is the note in advance, which he says doesn't work very well, but it's, the thief gives him something and says, at this point, 5 rounds, an hour from now, whatever, next time we camp. So basically the thief just gives the note at a time that's different than when he actually wants to, try to pick the pocket. And that's from Gavin Carver in that article. And here's just a little piece of art at the end where they're asking for some advertisements. The back page of this fanzine number 1 is completely blank. Next time I think they've sold an ad that they're going to have on the back page. So that's it for this one. It is 28 pages. Yeah, 28 pages of paper. They didn't print on the inside of the covers, and they don't number the covers or count the covers as part of their advertisement. So that is it for Black Rider number 1. Another really interesting one. I think everything in there was fun to read and thought-provoking, as most of these fanzines are. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the rest of the Black Rider series, one of the rarest that I have in my collection. And every place I've looked, people don't either have never had them, just heard about them, or don't have all 4 of them. So I'm really lucky that I have them, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys. I hope everybody is subscribed, and please tell your friends to take a look at the channel. If they like it, I hope they'll subscribe as well. Hope you're having a great weekend, and until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.